Now, as I stated in a recent short, I never really found the Primaris Marines that interesting. The concept was, I guess, cool, but the characters themselves were just kind of meh. However, there is one Primaris Marine who has entirely changed my perspective, and his name is Justinian Paris.
The bus schedule, the next bus.
I can't understand your accent.
The next bus to Bikini Bottom.
Oh, why didn't you say so? Next bus leaves in 5 seconds.
Hi, I'm Chrono the Harlequin, and welcome back to Live from the Black Library, and today we're going to be talking about the one Primaris Marine who I find incredibly interesting, and who I am praying returns in subsequent books. But before we get into it, I just want to thank you so much for watching this video. Please subscribe if you have not already done so, and without further ado, let's get into it. Now, before I talk about why I love Justinian Paris so much, let's talk about why a character like him is necessary and something I've been waiting for. And the reason is, the Loyalist Space Marines in the current setting of Warhammer 40,000, you know, in the era Indomitus and even before then, have been lacking truly great characters. Yeah, you would have some characters show up and do some cool things, but that was it. People would never truly latch on to these characters and really fall in love with them in the way they would Traitor Marines, like Ozzik Ahriman, or Karn, or Fabius Bile, or even Lucius to a degree, and of course Erebus and Corpheron, and so many others. Why is that? And you might think the answer could be pretty obvious. They're old characters and there's a lot of lore around them. They've been with us for a long time, so of course we love them. But that's not entirely the case, because there was a time when these characters were quote-unquote new. They had already existed when the horusheresy rolled around, but that was when we saw them as new characters with fresh eyes, their origins. And we still loved them just as much. And hell, there were characters in the horusheresy who did not survive it that we still talk about even though they're long gone. Think about it. The Garvia Lokans, the Nathaniel Garrows, and even less important characters like Argel Tal, Zephon, even Saul Tarvitz who never made it off Istvan, and speaking of Istvan, Huron Fal. That is a character who literally only exists in one line of dialogue, yet people obsess over him, and adore him, and draw fan art of him, and mention him at any given opportunity. Why is that? It's not just because his last line of dialogue was really hard, it's because of the struggle and the suffering. You see, what made the horusheresy so truly amazing was not just the quality of writing, which could be very good, yeah, it could be bad at times, but oftentimes it was really good. It was the characters, the unique, rich characterization we got because of what these characters were going through. In the modern setting, the lines are all drawn. You'll have loyalists see Traitor Marines and think, there's the enemy, they're gonna try and fight the Imperium, but I stand with the Imperium, so I'm gonna push them back. And yeah, you'll get good moments where there'll be these epic last stands and whatnot, such as with Merrick Grimaldus, but that's basically just the over and under of it. You get a cool last stand, or a little bit of interpersonal conflict between loyalists, but that's it. This is part of the reason why people tend to like the Space Wolves so much, because outside of them, most Space Marines feel sterile and indestructible and all-powerful and inhuman. But back during the Heresy, we saw all Space Marines, both Loyalist and Traitor, brought to their absolute lowest and pushed to the brink. And that's when you really see what someone is made of, when they're at those moments of extremis. Because they had to navigate this very difficult time, and this really hurtful time. I think we've all been in a moment in our lives at some point where someone we thought we could trust, maybe even someone who was family, turned against us or screwed us over, and we had to deal with those emotions ourselves. Maybe we became depressed, maybe we were angry, maybe we stuck by the people we knew we could trust in this hard time, and maybe we decided to skulk and go it alone however best we could. All of these different reactions to loss and grief can be seen in various Space Marine characters in a way that you just don't see with loyalists in the current setting. People were dealing with insurmountable hurt, and none of them really knew who they could trust, all while they fought for their lives in this one singular narrative. That's another big benefit to the horusheresy as a narrative. It had a start, middle, and end. And yeah, you could argue that it was bloated and dragged at places, but The thing was, that one solid narrative allowed for very consistent and sturdy characterization because you knew where characters were going to end up. And moreover, since we knew how it all ended and where a lot of these characters ended up after the fact, we didn't have to fuss over where they're gonna be, what's gonna happen. We could focus directly on the characters themselves. That's what the Horus Heresy is first and foremost. It is a character narrative, as we follow these people as they navigate for the very first time this difficult and uncertain period in their lives and in the galaxy's history. And that's why, for me at least, the ending to the Horus Heresy was so bittersweet, because we're never really gonna get another Garvia Loken or a Nathaniel Garrow with those deep, complex personal motivations, Garviel's divided loyalties and how he still feels for his gene father, Garrow's faith in the presence of people who would abhor him for that, and even the traitor marines like Abaddon and Horus Aximand, who are all still conflicted in their own way. That's another reason why people like the traitor marines in the current setting more, at least to my knowledge and from what I've seen. Their motivations are much more complex. They scheme, they backstab, they have opposing goals, and it all makes for very interesting reading whenever you pick up a book about traitors, especially given the fact that the outcome is never truly certain, because they could just straight up lose and have to run with their tails between their legs and plan for another day. People are still clamoring for more books about Aaron Dembski-Bowden's Night Lords, but that's probably never gonna happen. Show me one loyalist who gets that much love and appreciation. Now, I also want to note it's not just the Heresy-era Marines. This also applies to the newer traitors like Solomon Akura and some of the members of the Lords of Silence warband. But I think I've gone on enough about why the older characters and the traitors are more interesting. So where does Justinian Paris tie into all of this? Well, getting into his background lore, Justinian Paris was a member of what are known as the Unnumbered Sons. These were the very first Primaris Marines to be rolled out when they were introduced by Belisarius Cawl on Guilliman's orders, and there was a lot of them. It was a group of almost 100,000 Primaris Space Marines from the genetic lines of all those Primarchs who stayed loyal, and they all really liked each other, for the most part. They got along well enough. They fought, trained, won, and died together despite their differences, and forged everlasting bonds of brotherhood. However, this was broken apart because there began accusations that Guilliman might be trying to reform a Heresy-era style legion because there's so many of them. So, when there was about 20,000 of them left, either from them dying off or being given away to their separate legions, Guilliman gave them one last hurrah and then officially disbanded the Unnumbered Sons. And this was actually really hard on a lot of them for various reasons. One example being a Space Wolf line Marine who was given away to a new Primaris successor called the Wolf Spears instead of getting to go to Fenris like he wanted, which really upset him. But Paris, for his part, wanted to become an Ultramarine because he was of the line of Guilliman and came from Ultramar. But he was assigned to the Nova Marines, and that really weighed on him. And rather than it get better when he actually gets acclimated to the chapter and starts doing things with them, the more he was exposed to them, the worse it got. You see, the Nova Marines are a very interesting chapter because they have their own quirks and practices. One of them being getting tattooed to remember fallen comrades and past glories that they've won in battle. And when they offered to tattoo him with some of the glories he'd already won, he flatly refused, stating those glories were won when he was a member of the Unnumbered Sons. And that actually pissed them off, so they don't like him either. Furthermore, that thing about him hanging onto the Unnumbered Sons is a recurring theme. He feels like he's been ripped away from a brotherhood that had really meant a lot to him. He had deep bonds with those people, and now he's around the Nova Marines, who, again, are not very welcoming to him either, because they're one of those chapters that also sees him as being a replacement. Some chapters, like The Size of the Emperor, were more than happy to accept the new Primaris reinforcements, but the Nova Marines were not one of them. In fact, there are examples of him being openly sassed by other members of the chapter. They'll say things like, "Okay, then we'll do it your way, brother," with emphasis on the word brother to show they're being kind of sarcastic. And there's another incident when a chaplain offers to have him psycho-indoctrinated in order to better smooth the transition and help him feel more at home in the chapter, but he refuses out of hand. And this angers the chaplain, who is ready to pick a fight. So they're ready to fight him. They don't take him seriously, and they sass him. And just generally nitpicking anything he says. when he was discussing a tactical situation that had gone bad, he said, okay, first order of business. And they stop him and say, order of business? What do you mean by that? And he says to them, yeah, my father was a merchant, so what? It also comes down to the character of the Legion itself, in that they are very dour and unpleasant and really don't think much of baseline humans. Yeah, they're one of those chapters. You see, there is an incident where they come across a lot of dead human soldiers, but the Nova Marines don't blink or look for survivors or want to help at all. He does, though. He wants to say, hey, wait a minute, we should assess, we should see if we can do anything, and they just walk right past them. And he thinks to himself, man, that's something I'm gonna have to acclimate to. This complete disregard they have for mortal life. And this comes up again in a much bigger capacity. But I'll get to that later. For now, let me dial back for a second. Remember how I mentioned his father was a merchant? Well, his father is dead. And when I say dead, I mean very dead. You see, Justinian Paris isn't just a Primaris Marine. He's one of the original Primaris Marines. You see, after the Horus Heresy, Belisarius Cawl gathered up many youths who could have become Space Marines in secret in order to have a large stock of test subjects while he developed the Primaris project. And I often forget that Belisarius Cawl is 10,000 years old, but yeah, he is. You see, oftentimes on Macragge, people know when a child is taken to be a Space Marine. Their family knows. They'll be hailed as a hero and remembered. But he just vanished. When he's training on his own, he reflects on the fact that he's been ripped away from two families now, the Unnumbered Sons and his original family, who never knew what happened to him. He's working on a punching bag and reflecting on what lie must have been told to his family and siblings about what happened to him and how that must have affected them, and the fact that he was just put in stasis for 8,000 years that he has completely lost. The galaxy just moved by without him. And yeah, you could argue that, oh, it's not a big deal if you become a Space Marine and the galaxy didn't change that much in that time, but still, it weighs on him, to the point where when he's hitting the punching bag, he's literally grunting under his breath, 8,000 years, 8,000 years! That is not something I expected. That caught me off guard so much that I immediately stopped and said, wow, this guy's gonna mean something. That's the moment he became an important and relevant character in my eyes, and I was proven right as I found him more and more interesting. I saw in him the potential for a truly deep, nuanced, and interesting character. Someone who actually has that internal conflict that you could see in the Horus Heresy characters. Someone who's more than just doing his duty, is also a fish out of water in a situation that he doesn't really want to be in, surrounded by people that he doesn't entirely trust. I immediately wanted to see what happened to him, and he became far and away my favorite part of the entire trilogy. But I was also concerned, because I thought, oh no, they're just gonna wrap up his storyline by the time the trilogy is over. By the end of Godblight, he's gonna be happy and well acclimated to his brothers, and he'll respect them and they'll respect him, and blah blah blah, everything's great. But I was completely wrong. They teased that things might be getting better by the end of the second book, where he's rescued from under a bunch of rubble by a tech marine who is relatively nice to him, and he sees him and says, "Thank you, brother," in a more genuine way. But oh boy, when Godblight comes around, that all goes out the window. You see, again, I mentioned previously that the Nova Marines are very callous and hold mortal human lives in the cheap. So, when Justinian Paris is confronted on a plague-ridden planet by some survivors who view him and the Nova Marines with him as saviors, finally come to rescue them from this hell, finally hope is here, his superior officer orders them to all be wiped out, because they might alert the enemy to their position. They say, oh no, you're here, we have to go and alert the others, please let us just do that. But then the Nova Marines say, no, just keep quiet, okay? We need to not get this out of hand. And then they start ringing a church bell to alert everyone that help is at hand. So then, the leader says, we have to go deal with them and silence them. Justinian and one other Primaris Marine refuse. But then the guy says, oh well, I guess you're not gonna go. And he goes into the church and just kills everyone. He wipes out every single one. And Justinian just realizes that he is never truly going to be a Nova Marine, in his heart of hearts. I will say though, at least, he's not completely alone. There's another Primaris Marine who I just mentioned that stood alongside Justinian and refused to partake in the massacre, and his name is Maxentius Drontio, and I really like him as well. He's fun, he's witty, he's friendly, he likes to banter with Justinian, and they have a great dynamic, not unlike Tarek Torgadon and Garvio Loken, as I mentioned earlier. He's joking around once with Justinian to a tech priest, and he has to actually convince said tech priest that no, he's not going to make fun of him when he asks how things work or what's going on, because he is the type of person to do that. They have a great dynamic, and again, I really hope we see more of them. I would also like to see that Wolf Spear, who was not happy to become a Wolf Spear that I mentioned earlier, but again, I feel like if he's ever brought up in a book, his storyline would probably not be as interesting. He would meet up with the Wolf Spears and realize, actually, these guys are pretty cool and I fit in with them and blah blah blah. But Justinian has that dour character to him that provides for more storytelling options and internal conflict. Like, could you imagine if he just dipped? Like, what if he just left the Nova Marines and said, I can't do this? Either becoming a heretic in some way, well, a loyalist heretic, or a Black Shield. God knows what could happen, especially with Maxentius Drontio at his side, who also does not fit in with the chapter. This is the exact thing that I feel like Loyalist Marines were missing for a long time. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think I'm over-exaggerating how boring Loyalist Marines could be? Or do you feel like Justinian really is the breath of fresh air I'm making him out to be? Do you want to see more of him, or do you find his story a little bit boring and uninteresting? I'd love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments below. Please subscribe if you have not already done so, and until then, I will see you in the next video.